Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Patarne Nirvisesa Sindhavani Bhaskachyade Satarne Panchakalpati Vishchaki Pasanabhi Avatapati Tanam Pavane Vaishnave Namo. I hope that went well. Yes? Were they good? Do they get at least an A minus as facilitators? An A, okay. A plus, you're going to give them an A plus. Wow. Very good. Yeah, I needed to see the Ayurvedic doctor, and this was the only time I could get an appointment, so I really appreciate that. So, yeah. Krishna's mercy, I'm feeling much better. I had a bad sinus infection for some weeks. So I think we'll finally get that straightened out. So appreciate your facilitating that for me. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. All right. So you ready for our wow class? Okay. So here we're at the second area, finding satisfaction and purpose in our work, and we're going to be looking at a part of Principle 4. And then this afternoon, from 3:30 to 5:30, again, we're going to go through all 9 principles, which basically will cover the whole book. So there are 2 verses that occur twice in the Bhagavad Gita. One is Manmana Bhava Mad Bhakto, that is at the end of the 9th chapter and near the end of the 8th chapter. And the other one is this one, that's in Bhagavad Gita 3:35 and 18:47. And you'll notice this first 2 lines, Shreyan Swadharma Viguna, Paradharma Swanustitat. And in 1847, you notice the first 2 lines are exactly the same. The second 2 lines are slightly different. But they both make the same point. Don't go onto someone else's path, even if technically you seem to be doing it very well. This point confuses a lot of people. If I can get the information in the craft at a high level of expertise, then it must be something I should do. And not only does it confuse us, but it confuses other people who ask us to do things. They'll say, you're really good at this, therefore you should do it. But Krishna is actually saying exactly the opposite. He's saying how good you are at the information and the craft is not the criteria. The criteria is it your dharma? Now what happens when we're going to first look at a personal level and then at a societal level, although Principle 4 is primarily about a societal level. What happens when we pretend to be something that we're not? It's exhausting, isn't it? I mean, even actors can't be in character role all the time. Have you ever been at an event that you didn't want to be at? And you're like, oh, it's so nice to be here. Yeah, I'm so happy. What time is it? Yeah, and then, right? It takes so much energy to try to pretend to be something that you're not. Now, what's fascinating is Krishna says that if we do someone else's work, our work becomes bhayavaha. Bhaya means fear. Avaha means a vehicle. It's as if your vehicle is composed of fear. Instead of your scooter or your car or your bicycle being made of metal and glass and plastic, it's made of fear. So what does this mean on an individual level? I mean, we could think of this like if you tried to drive your car in the sky or your bicycle in the water, your vehicle would be a vehicle of fear. So on an individual level, and I hope you can see this clearly, when we are doing the work that's our natural dharma, we will feel enthused. And I mentioned this the other day. Just like when we're doing things that are very playful, that are doing recreational things, we often lose track of time. If people are playing sports, they're playing games that they like, or they're doing a hobby that they like, they often forget to eat. Oh, do I have to eat? Do I have to sleep? The activity in itself energizes them. If I'm doing someone else's work, it's exactly the opposite. I feel depleted, or I can feel frustrated. I can procrastinate. A lot of procrastination means we're doing someone else's work. In some way, it's instead of giving me energy, it's pulling energy from me. The next one is also very interesting. And when we're doing our own work, our mind is naturally our friend. You know, Krishna talks about how the mind can be friend or enemy. When we're doing our own work, it is extremely easy to have our mind be our friend. When we're doing someone else's work, our mind becomes our enemy. Now, it was only once I started really studying this that I got some real insight about myself. Like I started noticing when I'm doing work in the field of ideas, I have little or no trouble with my mind at all. But I would imagine that people who are not in the field of ideas, by nature, when they do ideas work, they're probably thinking, this is really stupid and useless. Why am I doing this useless thing? Why aren't I doing something practical? What value will this have? Remember we talked about the criticisms of the fields? When I'm doing government type work, I notice that what my mind goes to is criticism. That I'm like, why am I doing this? Why isn't someone else doing this? Why aren't the leaders doing this? What's wrong with them? Why aren't they doing their duties? I shouldn't be doing this. Why am I doing this? When I'm doing field of resource work, I'm thinking, I feel dirty. Why am I interested in money? We had an initiative by the North American leaders in the last few years. They called it ISKCON 3.0. I have no idea. It wasn't my title. But anyway, it was a group of different leaders and stakeholders in ISKCON North America. And I remember one devotee was saying, we have to tell everyone the joy of giving money to Lord Chaitanya's movement and giving money to Prabhupada's movement. We should really encourage people to be making a lot of money and give. But when I go into that field, I feel, why am I making money? Something's wrong with me. And I notice that when I do work in the field of artistry, I'm looking for appreciation. I'm thinking, why am I doing this? No one's going to notice. No one's going to care. Is anyone even going to know? And it wasn't until I studied this that I saw that I had a different kind of enemy in my mind, depending on which wrong field I was in. Does this make sense to everybody? And it was fascinating to me. You know, I had thought for a long time that I'm just a neophyte devotee, and so I have problems with my mind. And then I realized, but I don't have these problems with my mind when I'm doing my own work. And if I'm doing my own work, my sadhana is so much easier. If we look at the top questions, I've been traveling and preaching since 2006 full-time, and gone around the world over 20 times, and I've talked to thousands and thousands of devotees. I've been in thousands of places, and there's some questions that are right at the top, and one of them is, I can't control my mind. What do I do about my mind? I can't get my mind to be steady. And this isn't the whole answer, but it's a big part of the answer. Now, the last one is also fascinating. And this last one is, I think, very much misunderstood. Krishna speaks a lot in the Bhagavad Gita about doing detached work. Am I correct? Offering the results to him and working in a spirit of detachment. He also speaks a lot about doing your own work. He speaks about it very directly, like in those verses we just quoted, but he also talks about it to Arjuna specifically. Do your own work. Don't do someone else's work. And of course, that's throughout the Bhagavatam as well. Is there a relationship between doing your own work and doing detached work? And the answer is a resounding yes. So why is that? Because when I'm doing my own work is really just a manifestation of myself. I mean, it's my psychophysical nature. It's not my, cowherd boy self or my peacock in Goloka self or whatever that eternal self is. But it's a manifestation of the self that I have now. And there's a lecture I heard very recently where Srila Prabhupada said that to desire what is natural is not a desire. I recently gave class on the famous verse, sarva kama, akama, sarva kama, moksha karma, udaradit. And, akama literally means no desire, and Prabhupada, right away. You can't have no desire. This means no material desire. So in this lecture, Srila Prabhupada was saying, if someone says, I desire to eat, you don't criticize them. What's wrong with you? Why do you want to eat? How strange. Of course we want to eat. We have a body. Right? Sometimes I'm giving a class and it's ending at 9 o'clock at night, and then people want to talk to me, and I said, listen, I have this funny thing. I have a physical body that has to sleep. I can't answer your questions until 11 o'clock at night. Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, people are like, oh yeah, right, you have to get some sleep. And no one's going to criticize. You have to sleep? You have to eat? How strange. So in the same way, to want to be ourself is not a desire. And therefore, when we're acting as ourselves, it is so easy to be detached. Honestly, when we're doing our own work, money recedes into the background. And I think I told you on the first day that my doctoral thesis was on job satisfaction. And the research shows that money does not contribute to job satisfaction. Now, if you're getting so little money that you can't live, it contributes to job dissatisfaction. And if the amount of money you're getting is symbolic of achievement, it may contribute to satisfaction in the sense that you feel that you're achieving something and you're mastering something. But it didn't make people happier. If we're doing something that's an expression of ourself, we're just very grateful that we get paid for it. Because something that's an expression of ourself, frankly, we would do even if we didn't need to get paid. Even if you were independently wealthy, even if your parents were a billionaire and you didn't need to work for a living, you would still do the things that are an expression of yourself. So doing them in a mood of detachment and offering the result to Krishna is extremely easy. Now, some people misunderstand this, and I honestly don't know where this comes from in our Vaishnava tradition. Perhaps there's some Buddhists who believe this, but Rukmini and I looked, my co-author, Dr. Ruchira Datta, she and I looked extensively for anything in any world scripture that would support this point of view. And we couldn't find anything. But I've heard it so many times in our Hare Krishna movement. And as I teach this, it's one of the objections that people bring out. Isn't it more surrendered to just do whatever's needed to be done? Don't I get rid of my false ego more and surrender more and be more detached if I just do whatever's needed to be done? And even people will say, didn't Prabhupada say, do the needful? So I researched when Prabhupada said, do the needful, and he never used it in terms of do someone else's work. Not once ever. He used it things like, you know, so-and-so wants to buy some books, and he has sent a check. I'm forwarding it to you in the mail. Please pick it up at the post office and do the needful. In other words, you figure out the details. This is a general thing that needs to be done. Like if you said to someone, 100 people are coming today at 4 o'clock. We need a nice meal for them, and we need things set up for a presentation. Please go do the needful. In other words, you figure out all the, I'm not going to tell you the details. I'm not going to say how many of what color pens you need to have. But Prabhupada consistently said that we should be doing our own work, and that is the duty of the guru to engage people according to their own work. It does not help one to give up the false ego, or to surrender, or to become detached, to do something that is not ourselves. In fact, it works against it. It makes it more difficult. For example, I cannot donate your car to the temple. It's not going to help me in detachment. I have to donate my car. You all understand? Yeah? I can't donate your money. I have to donate mine. Does this make sense to everybody? Oh, you'll be so much more detached if you donate someone else's money. What? All right. So that's on a personal level. We definitely hurt our spiritual life when we do someone else's work, and we will also hurt our physical health and our mental health, because if you look at the first one, we're going to put ourselves in physical stress. In the second one, we're going to put ourselves in mental stress, and in the third one, we're going to put ourselves in spiritual stress. So somebody might say, well, that's surrender, isn't it? To put myself in physical, mental, and spiritual stress. By the way, Krishna talks about this kind of austerity, and he says this austerity that harms the body is in what mode? It's tamasic. It's in tamagun, and it gives pain to whom? To the supersoul, which is interesting. One of our Shastric Advisory Council members discussed with me, how can anything give pain to the supersoul? But Krishna is saying that. If we're doing some austerity that is harmful to the body, to the mind, what to speak of that's spiritually harmful, then this is tamasic, it's in tamagun, and it actually gives pain to the Lord. So we have no business doing this. We are all part and parcel of Krishna. Mamai vamso jiva loke, jiva bhuta sanatana. Yes, we all agree we're part of Krishna. So we can't hurt ourselves either. This is a very difficult concept for most people. I know I can't hurt others, but I think that the way that I sacrifice is to hurt myself. All right. That's on a personal level. We can discuss this for a few minutes, and then I want to spend the rest of the time going into what harms there are for society by working in the wrong field. So would anyone like to discuss this point about on a personal level? Yes.
What is some service, you love to do? It gives you lots of pleasure. You're very comfortable to do it. You feel yourself very comfortable, but it gives you stress. But even in the stress, you don't take it to, it's not a burden on you.
Well, what do you mean by stress?
The work is demanding so many things, responsibility.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah. So
That's fine. We're designed physiologically, psychologically to require some stress. It's like we require some movement. Our bodies function best when they have some movement and also some stress.
Yes.
But it should be a happy stress.
Yes.
It should be the kind of stress that enthuses you. We all, Prabhupada talks about rising to a challenge, that the leader should always put some challenge. Most of us, we like rising to some challenge and gaining in quality of what we're doing. And you could say that that's stressful, but it's a happy kind of stress.
Mm.
Is that all right?
Yeah, thank you.
That was an excellent question. We're talking about a different kind. We're talking about the kind of stress here where you're just like. I give you a simple example for myself, where I was asked to edit a book written by an Armenian devotee, Sarvabhavana, Salted Bread. How many of you have read the book Salted Bread? It took me 2 years to edit that book. Why? Because I hated editing that book. Why? Well, he's Armenian, and his English grammar had the natural faults of somebody who had Russian as a native language. He did the kind of things that a lot of Indians do too, put everything in the present participle. I am going, we are walking, everything was like that. Every single sentence was in the present participle. He also had almost, you're too tall to be there. You're too tall to sit there. You. Yes. You are too tall to sit in that chair. Thank you. So he also had pretty much all of his sentences were compound sentences. If any of you can't remember your grammar and you're just like, what is she talking about? They were independent clauses joined by and or but. And he would have 3 or 4 independent clauses joined by and or but, with all present participles. And basically he used this grammatical construction over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And what I was actually doing was artistry work. I wasn't actually doing ideas work, I was doing artistry work. I was doing like carpentry. I was having to take apart his sentences and reconstruct them. Every single sentence. And I had to do it in a way that didn't sound like me. I couldn't insert my voice. That was the only part that was interesting to me. I had to keep his voice. And I had to make it sound a little bit like an Armenian wrote it. It couldn't really sound like a native English speaker wrote it. But it had to be readable English, which it was not. And I could work on it for 20 minutes, and then I'm like, I'm done with this. And I had to force myself. You got to work on this. You really got to work on this. It's important. It's an important book. You've got to work on this. Ah, do I have to work on it? Maybe there's dishes that need to be washed. Maybe I need to clean the floor. They call that procrastinating. Procrastalaundry, you know. And there's procrastinating, and so, you know, I would procrastinate, and then after 20 minutes, I was exhausted. I did finish it, and I'm very glad I finished it. One of my friends said to me, you know, this is maybe one of the most important things you've done, and I'm happy that I did it, but I really wish somebody else would have done it. So it was a kind of stress that I shouldn't have done. You know, I went into it thinking it was ideas work. It wasn't. It was artistry work. Yeah. And it was tricky because there's probably not that many people capable of doing that. So that, you know, I sometimes end up doing work like that where it's not in my field, but there's hardly anyone else who can do it. This happened to me with Manashiksha. So with Manashiksha, everything was given to me. Some of you aren't going to understand a word I'm saying. everything was given to me in Balaram font. It had to be changed to Unicode. And I have a macro that changes from Balaram to Unicode, but you can only use it once on a particular set of text. If you use it twice, it messes up the ends that have the tilde over it, like pancha. So you really have to know what you're doing. But it's extremely tedious work. Just extremely. And I tried outsourcing it, and I couldn't find anybody that had the right nature to do the work and enough brains to do the work. I tried. I tried several people. And finally, I just did it myself. But really, I would have preferred to have done other people do it. And again, it wasn't a good kind of stress. It wasn't something I looked forward to doing, and I kept trying to find ways to automate it so that it could go very quickly and things like that. So that's a good example of a kind of stress. Whereas, like for these presentations, it can take me sometimes 45 minutes to an hour to find one picture. Now, I have a stock of thousands of pictures. I collect them. It's one of the reasons I'm on Facebook, to collect pictures. So I have a stock of thousands. But any presentation, pretty much guaranteed, I have to find some new pictures. And some are extremely hard, unless you're going to pay an artist, which would cost a fortune, to do all original pictures. So that's stressful, but I love it. I love it. I love, figuring out what search words I can use and how I can find, and does it have high resolution, and how am I going to put it together, and how am I going to design it? Because my meditation, first of all, I love Shri, so I just love working with Shri. And the other thing is I'm just meditating on what's going to communicate best. What will be the pictures, the font size, the font color, the font style, and how will it go together so that I'll really be able to communicate. So it's definitely stressful, but it's a kind of stress that energizes me. Right? Or if someone says, Urmila, it's a true story. No one's ever going to believe my true stories. You're all going to think I'm exaggerating. Anyway. So, Urmila, can you give a children's class? Sure. How many kids? 40. Sure. What are the ages? 4 to 14. Sure. How much time do I have to prep? We're leaving now. And it takes 10 minutes to get there. Okay. So in the car, I'm planning out everything, And I get there and I say, whiteboard? No. Blackboard? No. Flip chart? No. Blank pieces of paper and pencils? No. Okay, throw out the plan I made in the car and let's come up with a new plan. So that's stressful, but it energizes me. I mean, I wouldn't want to do that every day. And then, again, no one's going to believe these stories. But it's true, really, it's true. It's true. So a week later, again, I was, asked Urmila, can you give a kids class? And I'm like, oops, sure. How many kids? 80. Sure. What are the ages? 4 to 18. Sure. How much prep time do I have? Oh, we're getting in the car now. It was the same thing, except more kids, wider age range. So we're in the car, and they're saying, actually, what we want you to do is show us how to teach our syllabus. Oh, my God. We want you to demonstrate how to teach our syllabus. I said, I have never seen your syllabus. Oh, I'm sure you'll figure it out. And all the kids are there waiting for you. And not only that, we have about 50 teachers and administrators who are going to be there watching you to see how the expert does it. And I'm like, Krishna! Oh, where's the matas matir gyanam apoanamcha? But that's blissful stress. It was fun. I mean, I literally had the syllabus in front of me, and I had to figure it out literally in 20 seconds. But that was fun. I had a ball. So for me, that's a fun stress. Do you follow? Does that make some sense? And you can maybe translate that to your own life and your own field and your own thing. Yeah. Again, I wouldn't want to do that every day. I mean, every day I'd say, hey, guys, come on. It's not cool. Yeah. All right. Any other questions or comments about the results for us of doing someone else's work, for us personally? All right. So you ready for society? So we put this in Principle 4, which is about honest, ethical work of value to society. And this is in Principle 4 because when you do someone else's work, it's not just about hurting yourself, but you're also doing something that's highly unethical and very harmful to society. And people being in the wrong place, as we go through this, you'll see it's one of the main reasons that there's suffering in the world. So in this class, I'm not going to give as many examples as we have in the book. In the book, we give a lot more examples, and we give a lot of historical examples, and we go much more deeply. All right. So we're going to look at every possible bad crossing. Every possible bad crossing. And I think we have one or two people joining us today for the first time. Those of you joining us, I want to say the same thing I said in the beginning. You're going to be strongly tempted to try to figure out the Sanskrit of these words. Don't do it. Let yourself just be confused. It's okay. Please do not try to translate these into Sanskrit. You know the Sanskrit, and you know them very well. But I will guarantee you we all have misconceptions. Have the rest of you found it helpful to put aside the Sanskrit for these words? Yes? Okay. All right, so crossing government and resources. People with the mentality of government doing resources work, people with the mentality of resources doing government work. What is similar about these two fields? They're both expansive fields. Excellent, both expansive fields. What's different about these two fields? What's different about these two fields? Yes? About justice, yes. Now, it's kind of interesting. You know, we talk about putting people over projects. Which of these two fields regularly puts people over projects? Government. Which do you think might appear to put projects over people? Resources. Although if they don't do that, they can't serve people. And that's what's very important to realize. All right, when people with the mentality of resources go into government, do government work, they're going to have a hard time being aware of the whole flow. They're going to tend to be narrowly focused on their particular interest. They're going to have a hard time thinking of the long-term public interest in a wide variety of areas. And this may lead to corruption. When people with the mentality of resources work in government, they're going to try to make a profit out of government because that's their natural dharma. Now, one example of resources people working in government is in the United States, we have some privately owned prisons. Wow. Okay. Do they want more criminals or less criminals? Do they want repeat customers? So do they want the prisoners to be reformed? No. Are they going to spend a lot of money on prisoner education? In fact, a lot of what's found in these privately run prisons is they'll even skimp on the basic care of the prisoners. Government people, government-minded people working in resources. Some of you familiar with in the former Soviet Union when the government took over agriculture? What happened? People starved. Literally, the food was rotting in the fields. See, it sounds so nice. People over projects, care about people, don't have any profit motive. But when you take people with that mentality and have them run agriculture and business, they're not thinking about, what do the resource people think about? Is it sustainable and is it regenerative? And they're not thinking about that. And the impetus in the field of resources dissipates. Government-minded people working in resources, they're willing to give their lives for justice. But when you're doing resources, you're not concerned for justice for society. You know, you have to focus on efficiency and leverage. And we give examples of businesses that were run by government-minded people and in the book, and they would use all the profits for some social justice. And they would lose interest in having the business be successful. And often they'd have to sell it to some resource-minded person, because otherwise they would give all the profits for social justice. We were talking at breakfast about a situation that I was personally aware of in our Hare Krishna movement, where there was devotees running a prasadam business that was associated with a temple. The idea of the business was to help support the temple. And it wasn't just a temple, it was a community. If it's just a temple, if we're talking about just education and worship and you're running a temple, that's a job in ideas. It's leadership and ideas. But this was a temple that was something like this. It was a big farm community. And the temple president, who was in government by mentality, he told the devotee running the business, he said, you need to give all the profits to the temple. And he bankrupted the business. It was really a shame because it was a very nice business. It was distributing prasadam, it was employing a lot of devotees, and it was helping to support the temple. But he actually destroyed the employment for the devotees, he destroyed the preaching, and he destroyed the support for the temple. Because he wasn't able to understand how you have to put things back into the business. It translated to him as greed. Yeah, remember, why did I ask these questions? Profit motive, greed, concern for money, but it wasn't. I mean, even, I was telling these devotees at breakfast, I have a friend of mine who's starting a business, and actually one of my former students, and I was asking her about some questions about setup, and she said, well, so far I've spent $40,000 on this and $50,000 on this, and we brought in 6 figures, but I'm putting all of that back into the business. I'm reinvesting everything. She says, I've been told it's going to be 6 years before we're profitable. And of course, she has another income stream at that time. But somebody in government isn't going to understand that. They're going to say, you can't take 100% of you can't take your whole gross and reinvest it. And then the thing gets run to the ground. Have we seen this? People with the mentality of government working in resources, if they're going to think of what is a fair price, they're going to think of a fair price by what people need. Oh, there's these poor people, we have to charge a price they can afford. But it's not a price that, again, is sustainable. So you'll have happy customers for a short time, and then you're no longer serving your employees, you're no longer serving your customers, and you're no longer supplying prosperity for the society. Crossing government and ideas. Okay, what's similar about these two fields? Just? Ideas isn't so concerned with justice. They're both systems thinkers. They're both very much systems thinkers, and they're both very much big systems thinkers. A lot of resources people are systems thinkers, but about their particular area of resources that they're working in. But government and ideas are both big systems thinkers. What difference? Government's more executive, yes. And they're looking more at practical executive. Ideas is looking at more theoretical. And we're going to see some more as we go through here. Okay, people with the mentality of ideas working in government. One of the qualities listed in Shastra for people in the field of ideas is mercy. What problem do you think that causes when they work in government? Yes. Is this a problem in our Hare Krishna movement? It's a huge problem. We have a lot of ideas people who are working in government and say, oh, did you molest kids? But you're chanting Hare Krishna, that's all right. Has this happened? Yes, and we have one of the biggest problems we have in our Hare Krishna movement is a lack of justice, morals, and ethics. It's one of the biggest things that people complain about. And I would say among our devotees, the people that we have the greatest trouble engaging are people in the field of government. A lot of government-minded people are pushed into ideas or resources, or they end up working outside of the society. I heard one leader, don't ask me because I won't tell you, who said, we're establishing an ideal society and we have 3 of the fields. The only field we don't have is government. And I'm like, that'll work. Actually, Srila Prabhupada said only the field of government can establish Varnashram. You're not going to establish a Varnashram community without people in the field of government. Prabhupada says so. You can argue with him if you want. So it was like, it's not going to work. Ideas people are too merciful. They're really not that concerned with justice, morals, and ethics. They care about it. They definitely care about it, but it's not their main concern is something else. Ideas people working in government. So in government, you have to get people to be enthused about the group. This is actually a conflict we have in our Hare Krishna movement. Although, please don't ask me to talk about this too much. But you have to get people enthused about the group. You're not going to pay your taxes to your country if you don't have any love for your country. Whenever I fly on Air India, they always, Jai Hind. Ideas people think all that stuff is just stupid. They're too detached. Remember I said they're kind of like sports commentators who are just watching the game and not playing it? They're like, what's all these different affiliations in the world? What's all these designations? Why are you designating yourself? As I just read this from one of our preachers. Why are you designating yourself as a member of this or that group? It doesn't matter. These are all lupadis. That's not going to work if you're doing government work. Imagine getting up and saying, okay, everybody should contribute to Govardhan Eco Village. This is all our community. What do you mean it's our community? What is the ours and theirs? This is all artificial. And you're like, oh my God. It's just, do you follow what the problem is going to be? The pomp and the ceremony and the ideas people are going to go, we don't need that. What's the point? People with the mentality of ideas working in government. Ideas people often like to research, and then they like to research some more, and And after that, they like to research some more. And then they're not completely sure. And maybe Srila Jiva Goswami said there might be a place in one of the Sandarbhas we haven't found yet. Now, in government, decisions need to be made quickly for the good of people. You just have to. There are people who have immediate needs that need to be met, and you have to make decisions without all of the information. This is also a problem we have in our ISKCON management, that ideas people get into government positions, and they will take 20 years to research something that needed to be decided in 20 hours. Like, we need a decision on this. People need a decision. They're dying, literally dying, without a decision. We will convene another committee to look at this in more depth. What about Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur? Well, if you're going to look at Nitya Siddha devotees, you're going to have a problem. So externally, Bhaktivinoda Thakur was a magistrate. He was working in government. Externally, Srila Prabhupada ran a pharmaceutical company working in resources. You are going to have a problem looking at Nitya Siddha devotees. So let's not. They're setting an example for those in those fields, but that we're going to run into problems if you're going to talk about Nitya Siddha devotees. Yes, did you have something you wanted to bring up? Of course. But they don't like to be pressured. Is what? A big donor. If who is a big donor? If who's a big donor? Some person. Mr. Q is a big donor. Okay. I'm not following. Of course they do. They just want to take their time. They don't want to be pressured.
They are very assertive, they take decision, but sometimes the donor influences them. So
Okay, well, that's another problem.
Yeah.
That's a problem we'll look at this afternoon of corruption in a field rather than someone working in the wrong field. Okay? So we have two major problems on a societal, well, we have more than that, but let's say there's two. On a societal-wide basis. One is somebody working in the wrong field. The other, they're working in the right field, but they're not following the Dharma. So if an ideas person is allowing themselves to be influenced by a moneyed person, that's a corruption of the field of ideas. That is not somebody working in the wrong field. Can you understand the distinction? Okay. They're doing their nature, but they're not doing it correctly. Because a lot of people think that all this is about is being in the right place, which is why I spend 4 in-depth classes about what's your place, because that's people's main interest. And that's just part 1 of the book. Part 2 is you're in the right place, how to do it properly. Part 3 is what does the whole picture look like? How do the fields cooperate? How is their competition within the fields? How do they act as checks and balances? We have a chapter, Vision of a Whole Society. We have a whole chapter on sustainable prosperity. And we have a chapter on a specific model of eco-sociology in an ahimsa farm. So part 3 is probably only going to be of interest to systems thinkers. All right. But I'm glad you brought this up, because there can be confusion between being in the wrong place and being in the right place, but not following the Dharma. Okay, let's go now to people with the mentality of government working in ideas. What might they do to knowledge? Excuse me? I can't hear him. Okay, they might make decisions too quickly. Thank you. They also might politicize knowledge. If you have people in the mentality of government writing history textbooks. Now, what happens to the field of ideas for people in general, and this is true whenever government-minded or resource-minded or artistry-minded people work in ideas, is people stop trusting the outputs from the field of ideas. If they've learned that what's coming out of that field has been politicized, they can't trust it anymore. It's not detached. Another interesting thing is people with the mentality of government are more comfortable with hierarchy. And I mentioned this the other day about myself in my dissertation chair, right? How once I got my PhD, I went to my dissertation chair and I said, his name was Dr. Fenwick English. I mean, not only was he my dissertation chair, he was the head of the whole whole college of education in the University of North Carolina, and he was one of the leading educationalists in the whole United States. And I went to him and I said, Dr. English, thank you so much. And he looked at me and he said, no. He said, now that you're a doctor, I'm Fenwick. And this kind of equality among those in the field of ideas is not understood by those out of the field. So if people with the mentality of government try to work in ideas, they may try to impose a more hierarchical structure. And I've actually seen this happen. I saw someone come into our Shastric Advisory Council who was definitely with the mentality of government. And we were trying to make a decision, and I, as the chair, was spending a long time trying to get a collaborative consensus. And this individual wrote me and said, just make an executive decision. And I was like, no. The flow of knowledge in society may be impeded. The natural flow of knowledge. It's interesting. I've seen devotees who are in the field of ideas, often when they set up seminars, they'll have a list of norms. And one of them will be, do not borrow power from your position or your title. In this room, we're equal. And a lot of people are really uncomfortable with that. Yeah? All right, people with the mentality of government and ideas, now we have this reverse problem. We talked about how in ideas people, they don't have this expansive mentality. They often don't care if they get credit for something. They might need to, because you can't get tenure unless you publish and you have to have your name there. But it's not their inclination. And the mentality of government is different. It's like they're not getting their food. And they may be swayed by community biases rather than doing what's detached. All right, crossing ideas and resources. This is an interesting question. What is similar about these fields? Someone brought it up the other day with the criticisms. Both of these fields are seen as being not very empathic, right? Not caring so much about people's feelings. Whereas government and artistry, you're directly dealing with how people feel. Yes, but just like I had this meeting with the Ayurvedic doctor. Okay? So he said, your grandson, actually, he has this thing, and he should really take this treatment. And I said, well, we're not going to have time. Is there something we could do in the time that we have that would still have some effect? And he started laughing. Or that he was saying to me, you've got, this problem is too much vata. He said, don't eat things that are cold and dry. So I've done, as I think I mentioned, a year's study of Ayurveda. And I said, well, potatoes are high or aggravate vata. He said, yes. I said, suppose I put butter on the potatoes. And he started laughing. Because it's his job to tell me the straight sauce, whether I want to hear it or not. Do you follow? He said, look, potatoes are going to aggravate vata, whether you put butter on them or not. He said, the butter will help, but he's cracking up, you know. He said, you can eat sometimes. It's his job to tell me the straight sauce and not be empathic to my feelings. He's not like, oh, do you like potatoes? Well, then it's okay. And in resources, you're not supposed to be, oh, there's poor people there, let's lower the price so that our business fails and now we can't give them any food at all. Follow? No? Did the doctor care about me? Yes. Did it look like that? No. Clear? Yeah. Okay. So both of these fields appear to be not so empathic. What's different? No. One is expensive, one is satisfied. Excellent. Excellent. One is going to be diplomatic, one is straightforward. Excellent. Wow. First class. Okay. Oh, many more things. If they're corrupt, absolutely not. Absolutely not. If I'm in resources and I need to create prosperity for society, it's only an apparent lack of empathy that I'm charging a price by which my business is sustainable. You might think that's a lack of empathy. And of course, in resources, they pretend to have empathy. What would Prabhupada always say? For you, I am making no profit. They pretend to have empathy. Why? Because they have to serve people. And they want to serve people not only today, they want to serve people tomorrow. See, government is quite different. In government, the tax money, the fines, the things are coming in constantly, and you're constantly giving them out. It's a different way that it's going on. In resources, it's going on differently. But you're talking about, again, what he was talking about, a corruption in the field. If I actually am not doing the dharma of the field of resources, if all I'm concerned about is making my own money, then I'm not following dharma. Then I have the nature of resources, but I'm not following the dharma of resources. Can you see that? It may look like it's a lack of empathy. Don't you care about the poor, starving people? Yes, and we'd like them to be able to buy food today, tomorrow, and the next day.
I'm just saying that ability to cause direct active harm is much more for resources.
I completely disagree.
Than
Do you know how much harm is caused by wrong philosophies? I'm sorry. Wrong religions?
indirect
Wrong medicines? Indirect?
long-term harm maybe.
Ah, much more harm. Much more harm. Corruption in the field of ideas poisons the whole system. Different kind of poison. Distortion of religion, distortion of philosophy. It's a huge problem. So no, I think all of the fields have an equal ability to cause harm. It's just different. You know, if government's corrupt, they'll shoot you in the head, put you in prison without a trial. If artistry's corrupt, you know, you have an earthquake and your building collapses because they put too much sand in the concrete. Collapses on your head, you know. Oh, no, stop. I'm not going there. No, I don't. I have things to cover and I don't want to do that. It's too volatile. Is that all right? We'll go, it's worthy, but it's, we'll open up something I don't want to open up. Is that okay? Thank you. Someone asked me the other day, what would I do if I was the Prime Minister of Israel? I'm like, I don't know. I said, I'm not a military commander. I said, I don't remember a lifetime as a military commander. Okay, anything else different about resources and ideas? There's a very different system of ethics, and that's true with any field comparison, but I think here we have one of the most different, and we'll get to look at that in a moment. Okay, ideas people in the field of resources. So their nature is to be neutral and objective. And if they can't be neutral and objective, they're focusing on their own resource and their own interest. It may be very hard for them to get the proper energy and for them to have that focus. They're going to keep trying to switch back to neutrality. Ideas people and resources just don't have the oomph. They don't have the energy. They'll grow their own garden, but they don't want to do an agribusiness. A devotee friend of mine who started a business because she felt she had to make money, she said, Urmila, she translated my overview in Europe, and she said, oh my God, I'm in ideas. And she said, all I want to do with everything in my shop is give it away. And ideas people are like that. Oh, just give it all away. Like government people will say, give it to those who are suffering, give it to those who are in need, give it to the poor, charge them a lower price. And ideas people say, oh, just give it to everybody. Just kind of take it. I'm not going to manage this thing. And again, people starve. People with the mentality of resources, working in ideas. What are they going to do to knowledge? They're going to use knowledge to make money. Think about the pharmaceutical companies who research medicines. And again, you have the same problem that people will lose trust in the output from the field of ideas, which is severely damaging to society. If people can no longer trust that the output from the field of ideas is neutral and detached. If they're going to say, oh, it's done by people with a political motive or it's done by people with a monetary motive. Now here we're looking at the different system of ethics. For people with the mentality of ideas, making money seems to be unethical. It actually appears unethical, like I'm not supposed to make money. There's something wrong if I'm making money. People who have the mentality of resources are going to think that to spend money and human hours on researching something that doesn't have an immediate financial purpose is unethical. Are you following my logic? They're saying, why should you spend money and people hours on something that's not going to generate money? That's unethical. Therefore, they will neglect a lot of the work of the field of ideas. It's this thing that makes it very hard in modern society for ideas people to live. Because if they have to be supported by people and resources people are only going to support them to do things that are likely to generate money. By the way, this is a problem in our Hare Krishna movement. That people with the mentality of government or people with the mentality of resources think that a lot of the work of the field of ideas is stupid and useless. If you're a full-time pujari, that's great. But other than that, what are you doing? And I often think people don't understand that you can't just get up and give a class. You may have to spend weeks of study and research to be able to do something like that. When I was working on the Learn to Read program, if some of you are familiar with that as a children's resources, I asked temples all over the world, can I come and stay to work on an international curriculum project without any requirement of local service? Only 3 temples in the world agreed. One temple said, you can come for 3 months only. One said you can come, but you have to share a room with 10 people, and, and only one place said, yes, you can come as long as you need, and we'll give you a place, and we don't expect anything from you. Only one place. I was recently talking to a devotee who was telling me, she says, I'm so fortunate that my temple president gave me 1 week without any local service requirements to finish my dissertation. I'm like, 1 week, huh? So it's a very different idea of what's ethical. You all following? The ideas person thinks if I'm making money, it's unethical. And the resource person thinks, if I'm spending money and time on something that doesn't have immediate financial benefits, that's unethical. Which would be true in his or her business, but is not true if you're having to do research and study. Okay, ideas and artistry, what's similar? Both are fields of satisfaction. Yes, what's different? Okay, people in artistry are working to serve a client or a customer. Yes, okay. One is supporting, one is guiding, yes. Yes, excellent. All right. Okay, artistry people working in ideas. So this is also something I've run into quite a lot, that artistry is the least abstract of the 4 fields. Remember we talked about that? Like, what's a functional table is a very on-off thing. It's a very black and white thing. What's a functional business is much more abstract. What's a functional government is much more abstract. What is good work in ideas is the most abstract. And in ideas, one needs to consider all kinds of context and nuances. People with the mentality of artistry, they really can't do that very well. And if they try to do ideas work, they miss the context, they miss the nuances, they miss the subtleties. And I've seen this in our Hare Krishna movement. There'll be some philosophical question, and a person will say, here's the quote. And I'll say, okay, that's a good quote, but here's another one over here that says the opposite. Then there's one over here, and then there's another quote over here, and there's another quote over here. And who was this spoken to, and who was this spoken to? And oh no, there's this quote. It just, and you don't want someone in artistry to pick up all sorts of subtle nuances, because then your table will fall over. You follow? You don't have, well, what are the different subtle, nuanced ways we could wire your electricity? No? But you bring that into ideas, and you just can't get a whole contextual picture. People with the mentality of artistry working in ideas. So artistry provides all of the pleasures for society. Again, it's like artistry is giving the salt and the spices in food. Ideas is providing the vision of society. If people with the mentality of artistry work in ideas, it's like you're putting salt and spices into society's eyes. What are they going to do to knowledge? They're going to sensualize it. They're going to sensualize philosophy. They're going to sensualize religion. Does this happen? You see all 3 of these happen. Knowledge gets politicized, or knowledge gets twisted for profit, or knowledge becomes sensualized. All of which not only distorts the guidance for society, but it also damages, again, people's trust in the output of the field of ideas. And they no longer respect the output of the field of ideas. Now, because the field of ideas is the least apparently practical, like you thought ideas people couldn't do any harm. By the way, when you're saying that they can't do any harm, you are implying that they're also not being able to do anything valuable. Just by the way. which is a common understanding. And thank you for tolerating that. That's my straightforwardness. And people then think it's irrelevant. Isn't this something that Prabhupada talked about? We have a society without a head. People think we don't need a head. What do we need a head for? There's a bunch of useless people researching, red-bellied frogs in some remote river somewhere, and what do we care? You follow? Okay, but it's still a very on-off thing, Prabhu. Does the electricity work or not? Is it going to burn down your building or not? Can I drive over the bridge or not? Well, you may have to be very intelligent, but it's a different kind of intelligence. Does the software work or not? Does it have bugs or not? It's a lot. You're going to say, does the philosophy work or not? That's a lot harder to discern. How are you going to discern that? Do you follow? Does the bridge work or not is a very objective, it's a very concretely objective thing. Okay, so what I think I hear you saying is a lot of the complex technological engineering requires you to have a huge overlap with the information part of the field of ideas. But the work is still concrete. It's not abstract. It's not abstract work. It just isn't. The software does what it's supposed to do, or it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. How can you, how do you say, like, if you're going to have output, okay, in the field of ideas, you're going to have a good class, a good book, a good philosophy, a good religion. In government, you're going to have a good government. In business, you're going to have, a good business, whether it's an agribusiness or whatever it is. In artistry, you're going to have a good bridge. You're going to have a good table. You're going to have a good computer program. Those are increasingly more concrete. Like, what's a good government? There's so many forms of government which people feel are good, and many of them are quite different from each other. What's a good business? We were talking about how, I study a lot about cultural differences. And you just cross the border from France into Germany, and the definition of a good business completely changes. What's good business practices? How do you deal with people? What does it mean? But a bridge is a bridge is a bridge is a bridge is a bridge. It may have different abstractions in terms of the aesthetics of it, but either it holds up the cars or the trains or it doesn't. It's very clear. It's kind of like, I'm a social scientist, and a lot of hard scientists think that we social scientists are not scientists at all. Why? Because it's more abstract. How do you absolutely know in the social sciences causation? Well, you don't. You don't. You can have, correlation with a very low p-value, but you can't absolutely prove, I'm sorry if I'm bewildering anybody here, you can't absolutely prove one thing causes another when you're looking at human behavior. You just can't. You can look at statistical probabilities. Whereas if you're looking at chemistry and physics, it's not like that. I mean, even my godbrother Sariputta said in the higher realms of mathematics, you lose all touch with actual reality. But when you're coming to the hard sciences, it's clear. It may be science, fine, but it's very concrete. What do you mean by abstract, Prabhu? You haven't defined what, I'm giving you a definition of abstract and concrete.
Abstract means something which is in the world of, is at the level of ideas, which will someday become a product.
That's just a tautology. You're just giving me a tautology. Well, then you're talking about work in ideas. Then you're talking about ideas people, not artistry people. You're talking about ideas people that are working on the level of theory, that somebody in artistry is going to take that scientific theory and translate that into something practical. Well, they may be working, those people may be working very closely together. So your theoretical scientists who are coming up with the theories that are the foundation for the practical work of artistry may be working very closely together. But they're not the same people. There's,
Yesterday I was reading introduction of yours as well as your co-author.
yes,
And her case is very interesting.
yes,
She wanted to be R&D scientist,
yes,
but became an engineer.
yes.
So
And one of the things she discovered in doing this work was that being an engineer was the wrong field for her. It was one of the big revelations for her. It's something that Srila Prabhupada says all the time. Prabhupada always says that engineers are in the field of artistry. And as we were doing this work, it was one of her big revelations, and she changed her work. So there's a book I read in the last few years called The Alchemy of Air, which is about the creation of artificial fertilizers, and how the people who were first doing the work were in the field of ideas, and they were being pressured by their government in Germany to speed up the work because it was also relevant to making weapons and bombs. And they were also being pressured to speed up the work and move it so, because it could make a lot of money for Germany. And this really damaged these ideas people being pressured in that way. But they were working on a theoretical platform, and then someone took that theory and turned it into something practical. But that wasn't, they were working on a theoretical platform. Or you think about, Einstein, who's a theoretical physicist, and then people take his work and say, okay, how can we make a nuclear powered plant? How can we make an atomic bomb? There's a relationship of cooperation between the fields. And definitely there's, when you're talking about different inventions, it has to be grounded in theoretical science. But the theoretical scientists are not the engineers. They're not the ones taking the theories and engineering things based on that theory. So their work is very abstract, yes, but once it comes down to the level of engineering, it's no longer abstract. It becomes concrete. And I'm not going to discuss this anymore. Right now, I'm not. It's 12:28, and I'm not. Sorry. All right. People with the mentality of artistry working in ideas, they're going to see idea work again as foolish. It may look to them as like recreation, like doing a crossword puzzle, but they don't really see what is the value for society. It's like, how does it help people have furniture? How does it help people have phones? And what does it have to do with anything? Now, this is also very interesting because people who have the mentality of artistry want to please a client or a customer. They want to please, they want to serve. And so they may not be willing to do research that will displease people. They may not want to present findings that will displease people. People with the mentality of artistry working in ideas. So remember that artistry people are satisfied with externals. They have a comfortable place, good food, loving partner, treated with dignity. They get proper compensation for their craft. They're satisfied. So they're prime candidates for corruption if they work in the field of ideas. If someone says, hey, I'll give you enough money so you can live comfortably. And it's this combination of being satisfied with simple creature comforts and wanting to please others means that other people can easily corrupt them. Oh, you will make me so happy and you will please me, and look, I'll give you this nice place and I'll give you this nice thing and you'll be comfortable. Just don't spend too much time on that thing and just, report it like this and report it like this, and they can be corrupted. artistry, people, and ideas. So in ideas, freedom is one of the key pivots. Freedom of time, freedom of space, freedom of thought, and to be willing to challenge the status quo. To be willing to say, hey, the status quo is wrong. In artistry, your job is to maintain the status quo. You're the foundation of society. You're keeping society working. They're going to have an inner conflict. How do I challenge the society might fall apart. I don't know if I want to do that. All right, people with the mentality of ideas working in artistry. Now, this is a problem both for ideas people and for government people who work in artistry. The concept of pleasing a client or a customer is not their way of being. And this may show up in insubordination, failure to meet deadlines, procrastination. In other words, they're likely to be not very good employees. You follow? People with the mentality of ideas working in artistry. It's a different kind of honesty. You know, they're going to struggle with the different ethics, right? They're going to need all this freedom, and they can't. They have to push themselves into something that's more constrained to meet the demands, and it may be very difficult or almost impossible for them to do. Now, again, artistry provides all the beauty in society. Ideas people are often very detached. Just like we talked about ideas people in government. They're like, what's with all the rah-rah, our group? And they may also like, why does your plumbing have to be pretty? You know, as long as it works, like, who cares? I have a devotee friend who's naturally in ideas. I've been telling him this for years. And he runs an electrical company. I mean, not much of a company. It's him and a few people. He's working in artistry. And he wrote me a few months ago, and he said, Urmila, you're right, that people in artistry want everything to be beautiful. He said the other electricians, they put all the wires beautifully in the electrical box, even if no one's going to see it. I said, you're in the wrong field. When ideas people work in artistry, they may dry up the field of artistry, and people may not have any pleasures. We also sometimes see this in the Hare Krishna movement. Why do the brahmacharis need a mat? Why do they need this? Why do they need that? It's all sense gratification. Right? Why do any devotees need this? Why do Prabhupada says you have to have some salt, right? He said sense gratification is like salt. You can't have too much, you can't have too little. But ideas people are going to be, yeah, you don't need much. And everyone else is like, I'm starving. People with the mentality of ideas working in artistry. Now this, you know, Rukmini and I thought about why Shastra says that even in a temporary emergency, this crossing should never happen. Any other crossing you can do very temporarily in an emergency. Emergency means it hardly ever happens and it's very short. We do not have a 20-year emergency because of Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement or something. That's not the definition of an emergency. And why this particular crossing? So this is the opposite problem to drawing up the field of artistry. This is when people who have the mentality of ideas get pulled into the sensory nature of artistry. They work in artistry and they start adopting this view of providing the sensory pleasures for society. And this is especially a problem if your ideas people are actually intellectuals. And not all ideas people are intellectuals. Full-time pujaris may not be intellectuals, for example. You know how Prabhupada says an idle mind is the devil's workshop? So here you're doing this concrete stuff and you've got this intellectual mind that's been pulled into sensuality. You may then use that intellectual ability to promote sensuality in the society. So some examples that we've thought of are food scientists. So I read a whole article many years ago about food scientists, how they study what induces us to eat. And there's evidently a certain combination of salt, sugar, fat, and crunch that we are biologically wired to keep eating and eating and eating and eating. And so they artificially, chemically manufacture foods that trigger this. And there's one, I forget what it is, but some snack food, and their advertising thing is, bet you can't eat just one. Because it's actually been engineered that way. And so these food scientists have engineered food to make people obese and sick by using their knowledge of physiology. Same is true with advertising. People who've studied advertising and psychology, and they'll use advertising to manipulate you to buy things you don't need or even that are harmful to you. So this is one of the things that happens, that can happen, one of the possible things that can happen when ideas people go into artistry. And again, they don't really want to please customers or clients. You know, it just feels very awkward to them. They're really going to struggle with that. Okay, government and artistry. What is similar about these fields? What do they have in common? Directly serving people, directly working with people. And the difference? Yes, one in a parental way and one in a servant way. What other difference? Well, one is an expansive field and one is a satisfied field. So artistry people working in government. There's a very famous book called The Fog of War. We were talking about how in government you have to make very fast decisions without full information. So that's especially true in a battle. Right? You plan out the battle strategy, but when the people hit the ground, there's a fog of war, and you just have to make decisions with very little information. Artistry people really have a hard time doing that. They want to have some concrete procedure to follow. Artistry people in government, again, this is a problem between satisfied and expansive. They're going to have a hard time doing this whole expansive thing with taking care of all these people and what everybody needs. They're going to say, it's just a bunch of politics. Right? And they'll probably neglect a lot of their work. Now, artistry people generally, they have certain procedures. When brought into government, it makes it bureaucracy. Now, you need some bureaucrats in government. You need artistry people who are bureaucrats who assist government. But just like when you call a government office, the first level person you talk to is a bureaucrat in artistry. So what do I do to, okay, there's this form, you can find it on this website. Okay, but I have this special case. There's this form, you can find it on this website. You have to, but I have there's this form, you can find it on this website, and you have to, excuse me, can I talk to your supervisor? And eventually you want to hit somebody who's actually has the mentality of government, who can work with principles. Right? So if people with the mentality of artistry go into government, they will impose a bureaucratic system on government itself. Artistry people working in government. So remember, government is the only field where you run into danger. You're energized by crises. You run into the burning building. Artistry people are into security. We had a situation in America within the last year where there was a shooting in a school, and some of the police officers didn't go into the building. Why didn't you go into the building where people were shooting in there? Duh. And again, we have this thing that they're easily corrupted. If they're offered some, the perks that come along with government. What about government mentality people working in artistry? Do you want energized by crisis people doing your electrical wiring? and doing your plumbing. Same problem when ideas people work in artistry is that government-minded people are going to have a hard time being a subordinate. And that'll come out in, again, procrastination, disrespect, not meeting deadlines, right? Insubordination. They're going to be much more concerned with social justice than with the craft. If they work in artistry, they may just start organizing unions or something. Or their natural inclination for justice may show up in vigilantism or agitation of some. They need some outlet for this expansive justice energy that they're not going to get making pots. And I've noticed that a lot of people who are social agitators, both in and out of our Hare Krishna movement, are probably people who should be working in government, but they're not. And that they want some outlet for this, right? Okay, crossing resources and artistry. This to me is one of the saddest crossings. Well, I find it one of the most painful and sad as far as what it does to society. So what's similar about resources and artistry? Yeah, they're both working with the practical things of society. What's different? One's expansive, one's satisfied, yeah? Okay. What happens when people with the mentality of resources work in artistry? They want to make it bigger. They want to make it profitable. What are they going to do to the crafts? They're going to automate them, aren't they? They're going to industrialize and automate the crafts. And then people who are still doing the crafts can't compete. Right? They're going to create a fast food business. More profitable, fast food business. They're going to create fashions instead of, textiles that's hand woven and the different designs and the dyes. And they're going to recreate fashions that go out of fashion every 2 months. Huh? Premium brands. Yes, premium brands. You have to buy new fashions every 2 months. And then we have piles. I don't know if any of you have ever seen any of this. There's actually some places in India that receive boatloads of slightly used clothing from the industrialized Western countries. People wore it, 5 times, then it went out of fashion, and they're brought by boatloads to India where they unravel everything and they try to save the fabric. Instead of athletics based on skill and vigor and strength, it's going to be athletics based on artificial drugs. Instead of entertainment that has interesting plot and character development and fills people with different emotional satisfaction and inspiration, it's going to be, let's throw a bunch of sex and violence into here so we can make a lot of money at the box office. And I talked about how sometimes resource people grab a hold of a very talented person in artistry and use them to make money. You see this especially in athletics and in the music industry. And they damage the artistry person. Yeah? They exploit them and they damage them generally. Am I correct? Yeah? All right, but what about artistry-minded people work in resources? Well, again, there you have a similar problem to ideas people working in resources. They don't have the expansive mood. An artistry person might want to have one little bakery where they sell their cakes and their breads, but they don't want to make a chain of bakery stores all over the world. They're not trying to feed the world. They're trying to just make the world beautiful. And they just won't have the energy, the oomph to put in that kind of work. They don't have that kind of ambition, yeah. And so people starve again. Artistry people working in resources, they don't have this mood of sustainable regenerative wealth. And part of the way you have sustainable regenerative wealth, all wealth ultimately comes from natural resources. And one of the things people in resources have to do is take care of the planet. And artistry people may have a hard time doing that. They just, like, they're not thinking in terms of sustainability, they're thinking in terms of immediacy. And therefore, a lot of their business may become major polluters. Okay, so I think you've gotten a good idea here. Again, in the book, we go into many more details. We have many more historical details. We give many more harms that come, and we give many more examples. So we have 2 chapters on this topic. One, a general chapter of what happens when you cross fields, and then we have a specific chapter that goes into what I just went into today. And what I'd like you to come away with from this is that everybody's beautiful in their right place. Everyone's beautiful in their right place, and everyone's a mess in the wrong place. You know, for years when I talked about personality type, and I would talk about people who are more cautious versus people who are more risk-taking. And you know, who do you want running the temple accounts? Your risk taker or your cautious person? Your cautious person. Who do you want to go preach in Saudi Arabia? Your risk taking person. There's a place for everybody. Yeah. And as you get deeper into this particular aspect of career dharma, then you really see how many problems of the world are caused by people working in the wrong place. It harms us as individuals, it harms us physically, it harms us mentally, it harms us spiritually, and it harms society. So we have a few minutes for general discussion. This afternoon, we are going to do an overview of the whole book. So these 4 things that we went over in in-depth classes, prosperity types, the definition of the fields, the inclination for the fields, and the crossing of the fields, those 4 things, we will go through very quickly this afternoon. I won't spend a lot of time on them. If I only teach the overview, I spend most of my time on them. But I do the opposite if I've taught these in depth first, and we'll be talking about the other principles of career dharma. All right, so we have 12 minutes, and I am going to end exactly on time. I'd like to hear from some people who haven't yet said anything, and so yes, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. So, Mataji, there are some authors, like I know, who get their books written by others. What would that, like you were talking about resources in artistry, but because they can talk about it, they have built.
Okay, well, first of all, writing books can be is writing books in a particular field? Always? What books would be in artistry? Love stories. Not all fiction. Not all fiction. Narada Muni's fictional story of Paranjana is not artistry. So not all fiction. But yeah, love stories, mystery novels, detective novels, or even if it's true crime or some movie star's biography. I don't know who the current movie stars are. Tom Cruise, I guess. The biography of Tom Cruise or Elizabeth Taylor or something. That's in artistry. If you're going to write something about wisdom and philosophy and guidance, that's in ideas. So if you hire someone else to write your book for you, depends what kind of book they're writing. Can you hire an artistry person? Well, definitely. Can you hire an ideas person? Yes, you can hire an ideas person. It does happen. But that's a little bit of an unnatural situation, isn't it? Because then the ideas person is working to please a customer or a client. And what ideas are they going to give, theirs or yours? So generally, if you're hiring someone to write a book, you're hiring someone in artistry. I don't know. Why is he writing the book? He or she. Not necessarily. Maybe he just wants to make money. It depends. Or advances political agenda. It could be in any field. Remember, people in artistry can assist any of the other three fields. So it could be for anything. But it would be really distorted if you hired an ideas person to write your book. You'd have a real conflict there. It would be very exploitive, yes, and you'd have a real conflict. Your writer would be very conflicted. Does this make sense to you? Do you understand that?
As you have answered, it's appropriate. It's like it's not unethical, right? Like when you create a lot of books in
It's
your name.
completely ethical to hire someone in the field of artistry
in art.
to create a painting for you. So why not to create a book for you? And it's an odd profession to be a ghostwriter, but there are speech writers also.
Thank you.
I hope you got some wow out of this. How many people got at least a little wow from this? All right. I didn't say a moment. Hopefully it was the whole thing. Well, he was waiting for the moment. Whoa! There, you got it.
It was very enlightening, but you also mentioned that you will also explain why there are four varnas only, or whatever, four types of.
What I think you could see here, I hope so, and if you didn't, I would suggest you go through those two chapters, is understanding what happens when you cross fields really makes clear the difference in values. Of all the ways of trying to explain the difference in values. So I had three ways. One, I defined the fields. So some of you got it from that, and some of you like, oh. Then I start defining the temperaments of the people in the fields, and then more of you get it. Oh. And then when you describe what happens when you cross fields, pretty much everybody gets it. And you're like, oh! That's why Krishna says, don't do someone else's work. And that's how Krishna's defining the fields by dharma, by values. You might be expert at the craft of someone else's work, but it's not your values, and you're going to mess it up. You're going to mess you up, or you're going to mess society up. Why? Because Krishna says you can't what your nature? You can't repress your nature. Your own values. You're going to bring your values into that field, but they don't belong there. They don't belong there. You're not supposed to bring profit making into research on pharmaceutical drugs. You're not supposed to bring detached long-term research needs into a battlefield. Doesn't belong there. But you will, because it's who you are. So you can pretend some of the time to have the other values, but it won't work. It just won't work. You can do it for a little while. You can pretend to have values that are not yours. But you'll be damaging yourself and damaging others, and your real values will come out. So it was this particular part of career dharma that for Rukmini, Dr. Ruchira, and I really made it very clear why Krishna was having this delineation. And why Prabhupada talks about You can't have a civilized human society without this delineation. Did you ever think, why? Why not? Why do you have to do that? I mean, sometimes Prabhupada will say, never mind, forget it, just everybody chant Hare Krishna. Doesn't matter what you're designated, doesn't matter, just chant Hare Krishna. Because frankly, there's a lot of people that it's like, you just can't fix it anymore. Right? People have asked me, how old can I be before I can fix it? And I said, well, if you're 70, forget it. And like, if you've been working in the wrong field and you're 70, just like, it's over. It's like people with their, their marriage life and, well, I've been divorced 3 times and I've got kids from 3, and I'm like, forget about it. It's like, so it's done. And so sometimes it's done, we're in Kali Yuga and you follow. Yeah. But I really feel that this particular part shows the wisdom of the thing. Why? And if we don't understand why, we're not going to take the time and trouble to do it. Yeah? Is it going to be some time and trouble? Yeah. But if you're saying, wow, this is really making a mess. I mean, sometimes it's like that in our personal life. We become aware of something that's really causing a problem, and then we're like, okay, It's like someone says, hey, you have a leak there, and if you don't fix that, your whole roof's going to fall in. And then you're like, okay, I guess we better take care of it. Anybody else? We have time for 1 or 2. Is there anyone who hasn't said anything? Any of our more quiet people who, of course, don't usually say anything in a group because they're quiet. Okay, I think you said only 1 or 2 things so far, so sure. Yes.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Once we evaluate ourselves also, when we go back to the workplace, so people, and your colleagues and all also probably they are mixed up with their own set of values. Higher chances. So this information, this knowledge we have right now, and once we conclude ourselves, okay, I should continue what I'm doing right now. But how to deal with other people at workplace and probably to get streamline the whole work process or make it more easy.
Thank you. So the third part of the book, which we'll talk about a little bit this afternoon, not that much, a little bit, is about how do you have an ideal society as a whole. And can you use these principles on your own without everybody else using them? And the answer is to some extent, yes. 100% no. But to enough of an extent that you should be able to be satisfied. Now, we do have a section in the book about, not only what to do if you're in the wrong field, but what to do if you're in the right field, but the people around you, they have some corruption of the field. So we discuss that in depth, and we look at different scenarios and different possible solutions. One thing is that you're not going to find right now in 2023, you're not likely to find something that's perfect. I mean, if you do, wow. Thank Krishna. I've personally been in only a few situations that I'd say are absolutely engineered for Urmila, One of them was in response to my saying to Krishna, my dear Lord, you have taught me so many wonderful things through suffering. Do you have any other teaching methods? I said, look, Lord, I'm a professional teacher, and I can make a list of 40 teaching methods. It seems you're only using 1. Do you have an ecstasy method? Do you have a joy and ecstasy method? And then I said, look, I promise I'll learn. I'll listen and I'll learn. And so very soon after that, Krishna put me in the perfect custom designed as far as my field, my prosperity types, everything about it was absolutely perfect. And in that context, he taught me one of my greatest lessons, which was interesting. The process of seeing it was still painful, but it was a very private thing. Sitting alone in the room, and it was like, oh my God, look at this anartha I have. Wow. I told you I'd listen. Okay, I'm going to listen. But anyway, that was one of the few situations where I'd say that everything was just absolutely perfect. So generally at this time in human society, there's going to be some things that are out of order. So like I say, we do have sections. I'd have to look up and see exactly what chapter it is, but we do have a section about that. I think it is in relation to crossing fields. But what I would urge you to do is don't be discouraged by the things that are difficult or the things you can't do, but look at what you can do. What can I do? What can I do to move closer to Krishna's system? What can I do on a personal level? And if you have some situation where you're able to influence more than just yourself, what can I do to rearrange things? Is that all right? And I'd like you to keep something in mind as a general life principle. Big effects don't always require big changes. If you have two parallel lines and one of them deviates by a millimeter, you're going to have a huge effect. Huge effects don't always require huge changes. And often we think, I want this big effect, therefore I have to have a commensurately big cause. That is not true. I give you a very simple, very mundane example. So the North Carolina temple in Hillsborough, very, very kindly, when I got stuck there in the lockdown, you know the musical chairs game? You all know that game? The music stopped, I had no chair. So they very kindly, not immediately, gave me a little room on the temple property. And it's a little room. I call it a glorified closet. So it's enough for me, and I like minimalistic things, so it's okay. But, you know, there's no place to leave my shoes outside unless I want them to get wet. And it gets cold there, so you really don't want the inside of covered shoes that you have to wear socks with to get wet. It's not like here. So I had to keep my shoes inside, and it's a very small place, and if you keep your shoes inside, everything's going to get dirty. So I had a little mat, but it was a little mat, and so when I went in the room, I had to kind of do this little dance to open the way I had to open the door, dance on the mat, take my shoes off. And I tolerated that. I'm not going to tell you how long I tolerated it, but I tolerated it for a long time. And I don't know what happened. At one point, I realized I could buy a bigger mat. It was $15, which for an American is not much money. $15 for a bigger mat. And all of a sudden, my whole quality of life improved. And I was like, wow, a little piece of cloth. And my whole quality of life improved. Sometimes it's like that, isn't it? Sometimes you just move a chair to a different part of the room. And it's like, wow. Do you follow? Sometimes you just, stop eating sweets after 4 in the afternoon and your whole life improves. I mean, sometimes it's just a little thing. Yes? You follow? I took some apps off my phone's homepage. And I changed the homepage on my browsers to like a nature scene. It improved my whole quality of life. It improved my whole quality of service. I mean, it's embarrassing to say, but anyway. Do you follow? You don't always have to look for the humongous thing. So, big changes in quality of life. Often, not always, sometimes they do require big efforts, but sometimes they don't. So always look for what is the smallest change I can make to to give me the biggest effect? Always look for that first. Why? Because you're likely to do it. Right? So often when I teach, I'll ask people, what is the smallest thing you can do that will make a difference? And something you're willing to do. If you're not reading Prabhupada's books now, are you willing to read one verse every day before lunch? Do you follow? You have a phone. You can get Prabhupada's books on your phone. But if you say to people, okay, you have to read for 2 hours every day, and you have to take notes, and you have to post it on it, and then people are going, ah. Is that all right? Okay. So we'll see you all again at 3:30. Thank you very much. If you want to, can you just hand me the book for a second? If you would like to read the chapters specifically about what we discussed in this class, so that's chapters 5 and 6. So chapters 5 is in a general way, and chapter 6 is in a specific way. In chapter 6, you'll find many of the examples that I gave, plus many examples that I didn't give. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.